Where do the Miami Dolphins position rooms rank amongst their peers on the offensive side of the ball? We're taking a project from another Locked On show and applying that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting the way we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel has all customers in action with boosts and bonuses every day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We are looking at the Dolphins relative to the league today and tomorrow on the show. A lot of this time of year is so hyper-focused on what you have and what you need and who you want your team to sign and are your quarterback contracts going to get done and what other player contract extensions are going to get done or how bad's your salary cap situation long-term or are you going to meet expectations? Are you going to break a long playoff? And all of that is relevant. All of that is significant conversation to have. But sometimes the best perspective that you can have is to zoom out. And that is what we are going to do here today, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. I always enjoy this project. This is the third year Joe Marino and I have done it for Locked On NFL Scouting. We take a team a day and we look at that team and we look at all the players on the roster and we watch the All-22 and the college film or the college film of the rookies and the All-22 of the NFL players from the previous season. And then we kind of ascertain, how would we classify this player? Is this a franchise cornerstone player? Is this a high-quality starter? Is this a sufficient level starter? Is this somebody that's ideally a quality depth player for you? Is he a replacement level starter? Do we not know what he's going to be in the NFL because he's a rookie? Is he somebody we need to see more of so we don't really know what he is? That would be like an incomplete evaluation. And for the past 8 weeks, on Locked On NFL Scouting, which you can also find on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, me and Joe do it every day. We've been going division by division and scoring all the players for all the teams. And what you get is an output for your roster, and it's adjusted for positional value, and that's not necessarily what we're going to apply the Dolphins through the lens of today, but this is the last week we're doing it. We're doing the NFC South this week, and with how we kind of recorded ahead for a few days with the holiday at the end of the week, we're done. We have all 32 teams graded, which is an opportunity for me to hit sort on any given position group and position room that we have and see where the Dolphins stack up. And that's what we're going to do today. And it's going to put the perspective of where Miami ranks, not versus Miami last year, but every team incurred change. Where does Miami rank in these rooms relative to the rest of the league? And that paints very interesting pictures when you're able to apply Miami, not just the lens of within themselves and what your expectations are for within themselves to be as good of a team or a perfect team or whatever you want them to be, versus the reality of the haves and have-nots of everybody across the NFL. So we're going to start with running backs and pass catchers. This is classified in this project that we do with Locked On NFL Scouting as the skill group. It's all of your players who aren't the center and quarterback who touch the ball, right? Ideally touch the ball. Ideally, your offensive linemen are not getting in on that action, but we'll talk about offensive linemen on today's show as well. And what I can tell you is this is from an identity standpoint, the strength of the team. The Dolphins have the best skill group in the AFC, the only skill group in the NFL that surpasses Miami is the San Francisco 49ers, which, big surprise, they're off of the same coaching tree that Mike McDaniel is. And the ideology, and we've talked about it all offseason, Miami's ideology comes directly from that school of thought in that playmakers and catalysts and players with the ball in their hands and explosive weapons is essential to running an offense. And from a pecking order, you look at where Miami ultimately ranks. They're in front of Minnesota, who Kevin O'Connell is also off the same tree, right? And they have Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, and they add Aaron Jones. That's another group you look at from top to bottom. In San Francisco, right now, they still have everybody. It's Debo, who's still a quality starter, and Ayuk's a franchise cornerstone if they're going to charge to keep him, and George Kittle's a franchise cornerstone, and Christian McCaffrey's a franchise cornerstone, and they got the best fullback in the game in Kyle Juszczyk, so like they're rolling 5 deep. And we look at 3 or 4 wide receivers, we look at your top 2 tight ends, and we look at your top 2 running backs. And if you get a fullback, we'll probably slot them in one of the tight end spots. We try to give every team the opportunity to get the best possible score that they can relative to who their best possible talent is from a snap perspective that actually takes the snaps. Houston comes in 5. Philadelphia's 4. They're one of a handful of teams. Miami's also among this group. It's a pretty exclusive club that have 2 franchise cornerstone wide receivers. There's 4 of those groups this year for what Joe and I have scored. The Cincinnati Bengals, the Chicago Bears with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, the Miami Dolphins with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and the Philadelphia Eagles with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. But of course, that's half the wide receivers we look at, and that doesn't include tight ends and running backs, all applied together. It's your skill player supporting cast. So for Miami to have a wide receiver 3 that we classify as an adequate level starter in Odell Beckham Jr., to have an adequate level starter at tight end with Jonnu Smith, to have Raheem Mostert as a quality starter, and to have Devon Achane is still technically an incomplete evaluation, but we do lean him into the quality starter bucket, so he gets almost the full amount of points that a quality starter would get. You got this robust and deep group, and I think that's the thing that this came up on the panel that I was on YouTube at the end of last week with Reason from Finside the NFL and Omar Kelly and Alf Ortega from 3 Yards Per Carry and Neil Driscoll, which is great. You can find it on YouTube, Finside the NFL with a PH. But it came up was like the Dolphins, part of the reason why they ran out of gas was because the primary guys were so banged up at the end of the year. And this being a team that we've talked about many times on this platform, becoming a deeper roster in all phases. And you can look across and see the wide receiver 3 floor has raised. The wide receiver 4 floor has raised. The tight end floor has raised. The running back 2 and running back 3 rooms or positions and elements of that position room have been raised by the players and Jalen Wright and Devon Achane being another season in and being a little bit more established. Like from where we were last year, all of those ancillary pieces of the skill group, the floor has been raised. So for what was already a strength for the Dolphins, you're now a deeper group. San Francisco just happens to trump you because they have 3 roster cornerstones amongst their skill group. They're the only team, as I'm just kind of looking here at everybody's summary of who they have. They're the only team with 3 cornerstones from an offensive skill group perspective. And then the only other ones that have 2 would be the Bears with their 2 wide receivers, the Bengals with their 2 wide receivers, the Dolphins with their 2 wide receivers, and the Vikings have Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. So I won't spoil the full list, but I would say San Francisco, Miami, Minnesota, Philadelphia, Houston are the top 5. And then you have Tennessee with a lot of their spending. They spent a lot in free agency this offseason. Seattle with their bona fide 3 wide receivers, and then bringing back Noah Fant in free agency. And then Baltimore with Zay Flowers. And then Derrick Henry is the big addition to that running back room. And obviously they have the most robust tight end room between Likely, Andrews, and Patrick Ricard, if you want to include him in some capacity as a contributor because of what he brings to the table. That's kind of your upper quartile of the league from a score perspective. There's other ones like the Rams score well, but Puka Nacua is only a year 2 player. incomplete evaluation leaning into quality starter / cornerstone. So he's only getting a fraction of the points. So and we update it as the season goes along, which I think is important context to kind of reinforce in that every 4 weeks during the season, we update this. And on a weekly basis, we remove the players that are not playing so that it gives you a snapshot on a week-by-week basis on how the teams stack up and gives you an idea of kind of the pecking order in the NFL in real time with how we classify and grade the players. Now we're going to go quarterback next in the quarterback room. So we'll include Mike White in this conversation as well. But really, because of the dynamics of the quarterback position, it's who's your starter, right? So we're going to look at where Miami and Tua Tagovailoa rank across all schemes and all teams in the NFL. That's up next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison can be the thief of joy, and it is easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they all have it together on Instagram, but in reality, they have their own battles they are fighting too. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. I'm sure the comments will be totally rational in this conversation. Ranking the Dolphins quarterback situation relative to the rest of the league. I think there's a handful of players that are well regarded as top 5, top 6 players in the league that are well deserved to be in that stratosphere, and that's like Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Matthew Stafford, Lamar Jackson coming off the MVP. If you ask me who my top 6 guys were in the NFL right now, that would probably be my list. Is some order of Mahomes, Allen, Jackson, Stafford, Burrow, and Prescott. I think I'd probably 1 and 2 probably speak for themselves, and I think 5 and 6 being, at least for me, probably Burrow and Prescott would be my preferred pecking order there. I know Joe has his own list. We don't grade quarterbacks the same way we do everybody else, just because of how complex their value for a team is. So we actually rank them and come together with a consensus. So we average each other's scores for all 32 starting quarterbacks. And then we list them 1 through 32, and then you're scored in tiers. Like Pat gets a number of points all by himself because he's Pat, right? And then like the next 3 guys all get the same amount of points because they're in like the first tier. And then the next 3 guys down all get a reduced amount of points because they're in the next tier down. So in reality, 2 through 4, 5 through 7, 8 through 10, like they're sub tiers as far as the order. So because it is so ambiguous. I think it was Brett Coleman who said this on Twitter. And it's like the objective of committing to a quarterback is finding a quarterback who has the ability to give you top 5 play at the position. Because if you're really relying on annual year-over-year top 5 production at the position, there's so much volatility. There's so many things that can happen. There's randomness as far as from a production standpoint, interceptions and touchdowns and turnovers and drops and pressure for your offensive line. And some of that over a big enough body of work, you kind of feel like you know who guys are. But it is so hard for sustained like top 3 quarterback play in the NFL. And the guys that do that are the guys that show up on these lists first, right? For Tua, I think when Tua plays at his best, and this is not when he plays bad teams, because he's put good production and had outstanding performances against some of the best pass defenses in football over the past few years, right? Everybody wants to point to the good teams, the quote unquote good teams, and the performances against the good teams and beating good teams. But like, he's played good defenses and put up points on good defenses annually. So it's not just as simple as, well, he beats up on bad teams. Do the Dolphins win the games they're supposed to win? Yeah, for the most part, the past few years, they've done that. It's been getting over the hump in the highly competitive games where you need a complete all-team effort for 60 minutes. Channeling that with consistency as an entire team has been where they've come up short the past few years, specifically the last two. Obviously, injuries are a part of that. You're hoping for good fortunes, but understanding that injuries are part of the game, it makes it tough. I think Tua at his best is probably somewhere around the 8th best quarterback in the NFL, because I went through that list of 6 guys that I think is kind of tippy top: Mahomes, Allen, Stafford and Jackson, Burrow and Prescott. Like, I think those guys, and I think there's a big drop off from 1 to 2, and I think there's probably a big drop off from 2 to 3, and then 3 through 6 is fairly close together. And I think the distance from 6 to 8 or 6 to 10 is probably smaller than the distance from 3 to 1. Right? Like, that's kind of how you distribute the bell curve of NFL quarterbacks. The closer you get to the midline, the more crowded it gets. And Pat's like a third standard deviation type of player, on like the extreme polar end of good. But when Tua is not at his best, I think he realistically falls closer to being a middle of the pack quarterback in the NFL. Now, fortunately for Miami, more weeks than not, he plays on the end of his spectrum that's closer to him being his best or him being good. I think if you told me he fell anywhere in the 8 to 12 range of quarterbacks, and this is not, I want to isolate this player from his skill groups. We talked about that with Kurt Warner. It's not how it works, right? It's all a part of the same package. And the play at the quarterback position, sometimes those guys are trucks, and most of the time those guys are trailers. And I think there's probably 2 or 3 quarterbacks that you could look at and say, I think that's a scheme transcendent player that can play in any situation with any skill group and still put up 4,000 yards, 28 plus touchdowns, and take his team to the playoffs. I think there's a handful of guys that are like that. 2 or 3. Do I think Tua is among them? No. And then that means when he doesn't play well, it is a middle of the pack offense. And we saw that at times. And some of that was Tua's fault. Some of that was play calling's fault. Some of that was other personnel fault. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You look at the entire body of work. So if you told me you wanted to put Tua 8th on the list, I'd say, oh, okay, you're leaning into the higher end of the spectrum of outcomes of what I think Tua can with some level of fair consistency give you. If you wanted to put him closer to 12, I'd say, okay, you're probably betting on some upside of the physical tools of some other guys that kind of have their own bouts of high water marks and low water marks as a quarterback, that the consistency for a full 17 plus game season maybe isn't just necessarily there. So it's an upper third. I think it's an upper third of the league situation. From a backup quarterback situation, we only had one backup quarterback that graded as anything higher than a quality depth player. And that was with Pittsburgh, because they have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Whoever ends up being the starter there, you expect it's going to be Russ to start. I think it's kind of hard to completely write off Justin Fields, but like the other backups that score well are Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston, Joe Flacco, Mac Jones, Jimmy G. Mike White is a quality depth player, but like we're putting him in the same bucket of most of these guys at this point in time. And I know Tyrod Taylor's on this list. Mason Rudolph is a guy with some starting experience. There's about as many guys that are replacement level backups in the league as there are guys that are quality depth options. And there's really only one guy, that Pittsburgh backup, who you feel like, yeah, you'd be okay if he's a starter. So that's the pecking order for quarterbacks in the NFL, and where I would stack to is somewhere between 8 and 12, depending on the week. More weeks than not, I'd say, hey, probably 9, 10, 11 in the middle, and then the pole extremes put you on either side of that. And am I saying he's the 8th most physically talented quarterback in the NFL? No, of course I'm not. Because I think we know that the strengths and weaknesses of Tua, the raw physical ability and running ability and ability to throw off platform on all angles and drive those throws. And we're hopeful that his work this offseason will facilitate some more of that. But it's just it's never going to be the identifying variables of his game, and that's okay, so long as everything else is complementary, and you, as the coach and the play caller, maintain balance in what you're doing. And we get to talk about the offensive line next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's obviously a big-time polarizing talking point for a lot of Dolphins fans. We're going to find out exactly how it stacks up to the rest of the NFL. That's next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. We all love sports, right? We love them so much that when they die down like they are right now, with the playoffs having wound down, we get fewer games, and the sports don't sports the way we want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep going whenever you want with all of the opportunities that they have for you to stay in on the action. You can jump on the app and dream up bets anytime you are in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a booster bonus daily. There's something for everyone all day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. I would say this about the offensive line. The healthy version of it actually scores pretty well. It's not an elite unit. I would certainly acknowledge that. And the average score across the NFL, it's Miami scores as about a modestly average group relative to the rest of the league when everyone is healthy. And of course, that's the fine print with the Dolphins offensive line, is when everyone is healthy. The Dolphins got one game of that last year. And it's a concern for a lot of Dolphins fans who know you're going into the season with Isaiah Wynn. You know you're going into the season with Teron Armstead, and those injury histories are hard to ignore and overlook and not pretend like they don't exist. I do think you have one of the deeper offensive tackle rooms in the league. I think in this scheme, you saw the jump for Austin Jackson this past year. You have Kendall Lamb, who played admirably well. I think he scores an adequate starter. You have Teron Armstead, obviously, with the quality starter label. Don't think he gets the cornerstone anymore. Cornerstones are like Rashawn Slater, Christian Darrisaw, Andrew Thomas, Jordan Mailata, Trent Williams, Tristan Wirfs, Lane Johnson, Penei Sewell. Like Deion Dawkins is a fringe guy for us. Ryan Ramczyk, if he's healthy, some injury stuff there. Those are the guys that are the cornerstone qualifying players for this project that we have. So Teron, as he gets in the late stage career, Teron, just like Tyron Smith with the Jets, those guys once upon a time were bona fide cornerstones. They now just qualify as quality starters. Ronnie Stanley, I think that you could apply the same thing for him with Baltimore, just had a couple injury issues the past few years. But when you put Kendall Lamb in, you do experience a bit of a drop-off, but then you have Patrick Paul behind it. I'm not overly worried about the depth of the tackle position. They saw to that for sure when they drafted Patrick Paul and managed to bring back Kendall Lamb. The interior group, we have two players graded as adequate level starters. That's Isaiah Wynn and Aaron Brewer. I think Brewer has some upward mobility, but is sufficient level starter when you consider his skill set and his strengths with how athletic he is and the range that he has and what he can do in the run game. It fits the system, but you don't want to give him too much credit for based off of projection. And Isaiah Wynn, I think, was probably through the first 5 weeks of the season last year, maybe your third best offensive lineman with consistency. Was he a stalwart star player? No. But his absence was felt. And if you told me you could give me a full season of Isaiah Wynn, I'd feel pretty good about the outlook of that position to say, hey, that's not going to kill you all year long. So the Dolphins actually rank based off of Teron Armstead as a quality starter, Isaiah Wynn and Aaron Brewer as adequate starters. It doesn't really matter whether it's Eichenberg or Driscoll or Rob Jones. That right guard spot right now is a quality depth caliber player for Miami. And then Austin Jackson, fringe quality starter, probably adequate starter just based off of it's a scheme specific boost for him as a player. That still checks in the top half of the league for offensive linemen. I think it checks in 13th to be exact. Now, when you remove Teron Armstead from the equation and you lose the amount of points that the drop off from a quality starter to an adequate starter, which is what you have in Kendall Lamb, is back in the fray, then it drops down to 22nd in the NFL, the offensive line ranks. So that's where you start to get concerned. And then if you lose Isaiah Wynn and you lose the points to put another quality depth but not starter level player in at the other guard spot, and you lose Teron Armstead, now you're talking about you lost almost 25% of your entire value from a scoring perspective for how we utilize scoring methodology to score this. Now you're about down to 26th. So are you feeling lucky? Right? Like that's where you're at with the offensive line right now. Now, if you added, and I think there's one, maybe two of these guys that are left out there, adequate starter caliber offensive guards into the mix to give you another player, that boosts you back up and make sure that your floor is somewhere in the 20s as compared to getting down into the bottom 5, 6, 7, 8 offensive lines in football if you lose Armstead and Wynn for any period of time, which feels like a shoo-in, right? So that's how they stack. From a skill perspective, they're top 3 in the NFL in this scoring methodology that we use for Locked On NFL Scouting. Quarterback position, a little bit more fluid on a week-by-week and on a year-by-year basis. But Joe and I's consensus, I know where Joe ranked him. I know where I ranked him. I'm a little higher than Joe. I think Joe had him 13th, and I had him somewhere around 10. So that puts you in that 8 to 12 range at quarterback. So that's an upper third of the NFL quarterback situation. And then you have the offensive line, which right now is marginally above average. It's just the question of how long does it stay healthy and how far does the floor fall out if you lose your critical guys. The defensive side of the ball, recovering tomorrow. Results are interesting. That's all I'll say. And I'll tease it and hope that you guys come back and see me again. I'm Kyle Krabs. Appreciate you guys for checking out Locked On Dolphins. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day. I hope you will come back and see us again soon. Go Fins. Talk to you then.